Racism within our classrooms, a look at our current curriculum. Many of the incoming teachers today are predominantly white, as per the NCES report back in 1999. And the most of these teachers are going to work in urban schools. They do not adapt to their settings. With them, they take the old history that is catered towards white Caucasians. This leads us to the problem. To what extent does current curriculum show racism within the classroom? When we open a 10th grade English textbook these days, we see texts that are not catered towards other cultures. Instead, we are presented with science texts, U.S. seminal documents, and texts that are derived from contemporary literature. While we do teach our students very important texts that represent the African American culture and the civil rights movement in the U.S., like MLK's Letters from Birmingham Jail, we are still missing various cultures that represent the U.S. in whole. In an editorial written by Michael Peters, he looks at curriculum today and questions why my curriculum is white, prompting a discussion that most texts we teach in schools are catered towards the white population and neglects the other ethnicities. In a generation when we are becoming more accepting towards various social groups, we have to ask ourselves, why isn't our curriculum changing too? As shown in the slide, UCL conducted a survey showing why curriculum is still catered towards the whites, with the last one stating, because if it isn't white, it isn't right. These 9 reasons are not the first time we have heard something like this. In Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, she speaks about being a white female and not knowing she is inadvertently being categorized as a racist. In her article, she even confirms that as a white female, she can be sure that my children will be given circular materials that testify to their existence of their race. So the question is, how can we fix this?
According to Banks and Banks, 1995, multiculturalism's aim is to create equal educational opportunities from diverse groups of people based on race, ethnicity, social class, and cultures. James Banks in 2001 included the idea that multicultural education should transform schools so that all students, males, females, ESC, and students from diverse cultural, socioeconomic, racial, and ethnic backgrounds can experience an equal opportunity to learn. Multiculturalism helps combat racism in the classroom because it creates a learning environment that is safe, accepting, and successful, helps increase global and intercultural awareness, encourages critical thinking, helps students develop a positive self-image, allows for multiple perspectives on topics, combats stereotypes, and allows for critique of society. Multiculturalism, what it is and what it's not. Multiculturalism is not celebrating birthdays or major holidays. It is not looking at one viewpoint on a topic. It is not accepting what the textbook says and looking at things superficially, nor is it not acknowledging students have their own experiences that shape their understanding. What multiculturalism is. Researching different holiday stories and customs to compare and contrast similarities and differences, but focusing on similarities. It is going beyond the textbook and looking at topic through different points of views. It is connecting topics with student experiences. Issues that exist today with multiculturalism. First, the curriculum. The curriculum usually has one point of view on the subject and does not allow for a lot of exploration on different points of views, and at times looks at issues or topics superficially. Next, student interest. Research has shown that students learn and retain more when they connect with what is being taught. At the moment, because their curriculum is so focused/limiting, many students do not engage with what is being taught because they do not learn about people like them or things that interest them. Lastly, teachers. Teachers at the moment either believe that multiculturalism is a waste of time and should be done in other classrooms, like social studies, or it's just too much work. Teachers, being human, also have something called implicit bias, which are subconscious ideas that exist within us that we can associate with our students. These implicit biases need to be admitted, examined, and fought through if teachers are going to attempt a multicultural education in their classroom. How to make the curriculum multicultural. Bring in different viewpoints on the same topic. For example, looking at slavery through the samurai society, European feudal system, and in American society. Allow students to focus on their interests for research on the topic. Have students create and answer critical thinking questions that allow further understanding and exploration on the topic. How can teachers reduce implicit bias? First, teachers have to admit, examine, and fight implicit bias. We all have it as human, so it must be acknowledged and worked through to make sure that teachers do not bring it into the classroom inadvertently. Next, we need to increase empathy and empathetic communication. We need to try and learn about the lives our students lead outside the classroom and also help students reduce stress and difficult emotions that they may feel so that they can put themselves in other shoes and communicate empathetically. Next, practice mindfulness. We need to try to do things that reduce stress and focus or refocus ourselves when we feel that implicit bias may be at play in our reaction to our students. Lastly, we should have groups of friends that are from different cultures and races so that we can take those experiences and help apply them in our classroom.
Back in the 1970s, publishers issued guidelines for non-racist and non-sexist books. As a result, texts of the last 20 years have improved. Unfortunately, they're far from bias-free. The following 7 forms of bias can be found not only in K-12 textbooks, but also in college texts, media, and in fact, they're all around us. It is imperative that teachers are aware of the 7 forms of bias in instructional materials. Curricular bias in materials and structures include invisibility. The oldest form of bias in instructional materials is to leave groups completely out of the text or exclude them from what is being taught. Textbooks published prior to the 1960s largely omitted African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans from both the narrative and the illustrations. Texts of today have improved, however, there are groups that tend to still be left out, such as women, people with disabilities, and homosexuals. Another form of bias is stereotyping. Stereotypes and bias assign a rigid set of characteristics to all members of a group and do not look at the individual characteristics. While stereotypes can be positive, they are more often negative. Some typical stereotypes include all Arabs are terrorists, all blondes are stupid, Mexicans come to the United States illegally. A third type of bias is imbalance and selectivity. Curriculum may perpetuate bias by only looking at one perspective an issue, situation, or historical event. This can oversimplify history and issues and leave out important information to get the whole entire picture. An example of this would include how literature in our textbooks usually comes from the perspective of Western white males. Another bias is unreality. Instructional materials many times just skip unpleasant facts and events in our history. By ignoring prejudice, racism, discrimination, exploitation, oppression, and sexism, we deny students the information they need to recognize, understand, and perhaps someday conquer societal problems. One example of this is because of affirmative action programs, people of color and women now enjoy economic and political equality with white males. Another form of bias is called fragmentation and isolation. Did you ever notice a special sidebar or insert appearing in a text? For example, a chapter on the 10 Black achievers in science in a science book would be considered a fragmentation. Isolation bias occurs when texts separate issues relating to people of color and women or other projected groups from the main body of text. The sixth form of bias is linguistic. Language can be a powerful conveyor of bias in both blatant and subtle forms. Linguist bias can impact race, ethnicity, gender, accents, age, and sexual orientation. Native Americans described as roaming, wandering, roving across the land. Such language implicitly justifies the seizure of Native American lands by the more goal-directed Americans who traveled and settled in the West. Such words as forefathers, mankind, and businessmen serve to deny the contributions, even in existence, of females. And then there is also the bias against non-English speakers that occurs a lot with linguistic bias. The final form of bias in text is called cosmetic bias. Cosmetic bias tricks one because the cover and the photos and posters all look very multicultural. However, the content within the book is still very biased and excludes little amount of real multicultural content. For example, a science textbook that features a glossy pullout of female scientists but includes very little narrative of the scientific contributions of women. Or a music book with an eye-catching, multi-ethnic cover that projects a world of diverse songs and symphonies, but really in the end only teaches the traditional white male composers. Once educators understand bias in the curriculum, it is important that they teach their students how to look at this bias as well. Teaching students about curriculum and world bias, create a classroom environment that reflects diversity, equity, and justice. Engage families and communities in ways that are meaningful. Encourage students to speak out against bias and injustice. Support student identities and make it safe for them to be fully themselves. Use instructional strategies that support diverse learning styles, and teach students how to identify bias in the classroom, curriculum, and the text that they read.
Children's literature teaches children about who is important, who matters, and who is visible. Consequently, carefully choosing quality children's books is an indispensable educational and child-rearing task. The most difficult task in creating an anti-bias library for your classroom is knowing where to start. According to our research, the balance of books matters most during the selection process. All books should represent people who are real and distinctive without stereotyping or tokenism. Locate books that show groups who are often unseen. It is a vital component that the authors and illustrators of every book should demonstrate expert knowledge of the culture and the story, either as members of that group or because of real experience and study. For accurate, authentic diversity with anti-bias values, a library or classroom must provide a combination of books that reflects the children, families, and communities of the program. Additional titles should depict diversity in the USA and in the world as children get older. And an anti-bias library maintains a balance of books that portray a variety of ways of life, a wide range of family structures and stories that engage young children, blue-collar workers, farmers, service workers, and artists, as well as professionals and white-collar workers, differently abled and able-bodied people actively taking initiative and filling a range of jobs and roles in the family, and diversity of looks, work, family, and way of life within all racial and/or ethnic groups.
According to the article, Diversity in Schools Must Include Curriculum, the evidence paints a clear picture. Students who attend diverse public schools learn more, exhibit less racial prejudice, and report higher overall self-confidence. But to fully realize the potential of these benefits, schools must ensure diversity exists on every level by ensuring diverse enrollment, integrating classrooms, and crucially implementing curricula which reflects the history and culture of students of all backgrounds. Advocates for equitable education reform must be invested in diversifying not only classrooms, but lesson plans too. Unfortunately, a recent change to the Advanced Placement World History curriculum shows that the fight for diversity in curriculum remains an uphill battle.